Hello, everybody. This is Mike from the Hey, Are You Still There podcast. My wife Beth and I would like to invite you to join us each week as we examine life at the intersection of marriage, family, careers, and ministry. Through 28 years of ministry, 26 years of marriage, 23 years of professional careers, and 21 years of being parents to 3 kids, our fun and honest discussions promise to have something for everyone. And now, on to the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another special pop-up edition of the Hey, Are You Still There podcast. This is Mike.
And Beth.
And this is the 4th and final episode of our Enneagram series. If you've been following along with us, which it looks like a lot of people have, we started off the very first episode with just me kind of explaining how we stumbled upon the Enneagram and how the life changer it was for me personally. I don't want to speak for everybody, but for me, it was very enlightening, eye-opening. It gave me some stuff that I started to realize about myself that maybe wasn't as broken as I thought, but maybe was a little bit unhealthy, and trying to work on that over the last many years to try to make it more healthier. The second episode, Beth was on board and she spoke about her number, and we talked a little bit more about numbers and triads, looking at the gut, the head, and the heart triad, how those numbers fall into those various triads. Episode 3, we had some comments and some questions to go in a little bit deeper for the triad. So we tried to address those. And then we dove into wings, because it's not enough just to have a number. You also have to have a triad, and you also have to have a wing. And so in some ways, the Enneagram is pretty simple once you learn it, but it's like one of those board games that takes about an hour to explain. But once you start playing it, you're like, well, this isn't as hard as it seemed.
Yeah, then it starts to make sense once you kind of read about it and dig in. But at first, it can seem really overwhelming, I guess.
Yeah, and that's why I like to slow boil. Let's just talk about what the numbers are.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about how they're grouped together in triads. Now let's talk about what other numbers that your number may share, your wing, the number beside you. And I'm going to pause right there before we dive into our last discussion. We did have a listener reach out and ask, is it possible that both your wings are equal? And I have to admit, I think we said on the show you would have a dominant wing, but I thought that's what I remembered. So I had to do a little bit more research and double check and make sure my facts were correct. And that is what they believe. They believe that while your number may share tendencies of both other numbers on either side of you. For example, I'm a 1. So I'm going to have some 2 in me. I'm going to have some 9 in me. So I'm going to have the loving helper traits. I'm also going to have the peacemaker trait from the 9. One of those 2 wings is going to be more than likely more dominant than the other. There are rare occasions where someone just can't figure out which is your dominant wing, and we'll just call it 50-50, and that's okay. The big thing is just learning your main number, and the wings kind of help figure out what those numbers may be. But yes, your wing can be, in rare occasions, I think, pretty equal, but most of the time, one of your wings is a bit more dominant than the other. Thinking about the wings beside a 7, Beth, you're an 8 and a 6. Is there one that you felt like was more dominant than the other?
I thought probably because I can be a little more anxious and things like the 6, but I think that drive for justice and everything that I have, like wanting to stand up for other people, probably takes me a little bit more towards the 8. The other thing that helped me and may help people is to read the descriptions, because if you're not an 8, it's hard to, or a 6, then you're like, well, I'm a 7, but what does that mean? What does it look like? And so you can go and do some research, and it will start to tell you some things like, if you are a 7 with a wing of an 8, I think one of the things is they said some 7s can be like super flighty. And part of this has to do, which what we'll talk about in a little bit, about being healthy and unhealthy. But also, I think the 7s with a wing of an 8 tend to be a little more driven, a little more able to like get things done. And so since I've always like performed well academically and things like that, I think that also sort of affirms that idea that I probably tend a little more towards 7 with the wing of an 8. But it helped me to read that description and compare it to the description of the 7 with the wing of a 6.
Yeah, I can see some 8 in you.
Yeah.
Like I've seen that 8 come out. That
On this podcast,
that
maybe
aggressive hard A that kind of will stand up and fight for justice or fight for
somebody else.
Be that bulldog.
Yeah.
And you do share some of the 6 with the at times indecision.
Yeah.
Which is a characteristic of a 6, an unhealthy 6.
Which is why I have my analysis paralysis shirt, but because I do get that from time to time.
Right.
Yeah.
So today on our last episode, we're going to talk about what Beth just mentioned, the healthy, unhealthy. This is, it's funny. We're so sensitive to words nowadays. What's a good word today is going to be a bad word tomorrow. It's always changing. So when the Enneagram, back in 2017, 2018, when I first started learning about it, like the word for number 1s was perfectionist. But now all of a sudden that's a bad word.
Yeah, we do not want to be a perfectionist.
It made the ones feel bad about themselves, I guess. So now they're
you are
called
fragile. Yes, you're
so
fragile.
now they're called the reformers or the improvers.
Oh, yes.
I'm not trying to be perfect. I just want to
improve it. Yeah, let me improve how you load the dishwasher, Beth.
Right. So we'll talk about some of these words. We may flip-flop, but and I may end up just calling it the perfectionist because that's what I first learned, and I don't think that's a bad word.
I don't know if the 7's always been an enthusiast. I think it has. I guess no one gets really torn up about being called an enthusiast.
Yeah, enthusiast, the joyful person, things like that. But there's even healthy and unhealthy.
Yeah.
Kind of done away with those.
Well, you said something like that. What that
resourceful.
Resourceful and less resourceful.
Yes. So it's not healthy, unhealthy, which you'll probably hear us refer to the numbers as, but it's resourceful and less resourceful.
What's interesting is like when I was in therapy, I know that this has been a trend too. Like I would say, well, so-and-so is exhibiting manipulative behavior. And they're like, well, manipulative it's really just a way of saying that person is maybe trying to get their needs met. And, they might have said in a less resourceful way. But again, we don't even say necessarily things are manipulative. Of course, that does have a negative connotation. But so it's just interesting, like you said, how the words change. But I think will bend towards saying when I was healthy or unhealthy, how I've exhibited that. I think it's going to be hard for me to remember to say resourceful and less resourceful.
Yeah, it's just a mouthful.
Yeah.
So if that's, you hear us say healthy, unhealthy, just
know what we mean.
You know what we mean. And if that offends you, there's other podcasts that may not. So you can turn over to there. But we're not trying to offend anyone. We're trying to help you. So everyone has a number. Mm-hmm. Everyone has that core number. Mine's a 1. Beth's is a 7. Every number has a triad. Mm-hmm. You have the head triad, which are the people who think first and sometimes will overthink things. These are your 5, 6, and 7s. Mm-hmm. You have your gut triad. These are the people who tend to lead with their gut. What does their gut feeling tell them? These are your 8, 9s, and 1s. And then you have your heart triad, the more emotional, how am I feeling about this? And that's your 2, 3s, and 4s. Those triads, one's not any better than the other. It's just where do you go when you're trying to make a decision? You'll have some people that are, man, I got to think this through. Mm-hmm. I really got to think about this. And you might have a gut person that's just like, let's just make a decision and move on with it, which is what I do. I go with my gut the majority of the time. Beth,
I have a pro and con. It may happen rapidly, just like your gut, but I've got a pros and cons list in my head that I logically think through usually for most things.
And we talked about that last week. What happens when your number really sits on the line of 2 triads. And I'm a 1, with a 2 wing. Well, my 1 is in the gut triad. The 2 is in the heart triad. So basically what I'm saying is I don't think about anything. I just act and react. It's whatever my gut and my heart tells me. And then if I really have to, if you tie me down and force me, I guess I'll think about it. You sit on, you're a 7 with, what'd you say, probably a wing of an 8?
Yes.
And so you think first.
And then gut.
When it comes down to it, I'm just going to go with my gut. So there's that.
Yeah.
So you have your core numbers, you have your triads, you have your wings, which are your numbers that you share certain characteristics about. But all of these numbers, and we're just going to talk about your core numbers today. Forget wings, forget triads. We're just talking about what your core number is.
Go back to basics. You're a 1 or 2 or 3.
Yeah, 1 through 9.
Yeah, don't need to worry about the wings.
If you have not taken a test yet, there are lots of free tests online. I don't know how accurate those are. I've heard people say, well, I've taken a couple of those free ones and they all come back different.
One of our kids just took one and I do not think it identified that child correctly at all.
The absolute best is the WEPSS test. It's like 10 or 15 bucks. It's 200 questions. To me, you will know with about 99% accuracy what you are. And if you're that invested into the Enneagram, if you're that invested into self-care, soul care, self-growth, it's worth the 10 or 15 bucks to do it. It just do it. And but the WEPSS test is what you want to take. It will give you pages and pages of printout at the end, custom made for you, talking to you about not just what your number is, what your wing is, and then it will also talk to you in great detail about your health of your number, whether it's healthy or unhealthy. And what I mean by that is this. If you've ever looked at an Enneagram diagram, Enne is 9, gram is picture. So it's a picture of 9 numbers. It's a big circle. And it has the 9 is at the 12 o'clock, and then the 1 is at the 1 o'clock, but it kind of works its way around. But you've seen lines all in there. It looks pentagramish. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like it looks like it makes no sense.
Yeah.
And it will make no sense unless you find a chart that has arrows on it. To me, the lines don't tell you anything except the other numbers that you're connected to. But to me, you want to find one that has the line with the arrows. Because coming out of a 1, you're going to have an arrow pointing one direction. And then coming out of the 1, you might have an arrow pointing another direction. The best are the ones that are color-coded. Maybe one's green and one's red. What the green arrow means and the number that it goes to is when I am the healthiest version of me, when I'm being the best one that I can possibly be, I resemble the best characteristics of another number.
Yeah.
Is that correct, Beth? Am I saying that with clarity? Is there anything there that wasn't clear?
No, I think that makes sense. So you're still at core a 1, but when 1s are super healthy, you're going to look like you're going to have some characteristics of this other number. Right. You're going to be able to think in that other way or act in that other way.
So for me, when I'm at my healthiest as a 1, I become a healthy 7. 7s are Beth. 7s are the life of the party. They're the enthusiasts. They're joyful, and And it
doesn't mean you become a 7.
No.
You don't transform to a 7. Nope. You're always still a 1.
Yeah. Which makes a lot of sense when I started learning that, because there are times in my life when I feel like I can be the life of the party, where I can be joking and laughing and full of enthusiasm and just playful and, just let's go do it, kind of thing. Very impulsive in a fun way. But I'm not like that all the time. And I am naturally an introvert by nature. So when I get into those situations where I'm a 7, it really does feel like I'm a different person, because that's not normally Mike G. That's a different Mike. The Mike that I normally am enjoys being alone. I enjoy being around people, drains me. If given the choice between a party and just hanging out with 1 or 2 people, I'll almost always choose the 1 or 2 people. But when I'm doing good, when I'm healthy, I am in a 7, and I'm in this state of euphoria where it's just like, the more the merrier, let's just have fun, When I'm bad, when a 7, and this is where you got to look at the chart with the lines, with the arrows. If a green arrow goes from 1 to 7, my bad goes to a 5. Correct?
No,
a 4.
Your
Sorry,
bad
sorry.
goes.
Mine goes to a 4.
Yeah,
Sorry.
You're getting confused with
4.
me.
I was thinking about Beth. Mine goes to a 4. A 4 is, they're called kind of the original person. They're very authentic. They value individuality. They're sensitive. They're kind of known as the artist. They're very deep. They focus a lot on the internal. So you might say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, as we're going to talk about, there are healthy and unhealthy sides of every number. As a healthy 1, I go to a 7. As an unhealthy 1, I go to an unhealthy 4. Mm-hmm. An unhealthy 4 where that originality, authenticity, individuality, artistic expression, when all of that is in a good place, that's fine. But on the negative side of that, they can become very dark, very brooding, mm-hmm. very depressed. Mm-hmm. I don't know if this is even a term anymore, but I know emo,
Yeah.
like it's the guy or girl that dresses in black.
So I was going to say, are you going to paint your nails black and put on black lipstick?
So that happens. Yeah. So when ones are in a bad place, I'm going to go to an unhealthy 4, mm-hmm. which means it's the total opposite of who I am as a 7.
Right.
As a 7, I'm enthusiastic. I love people. Mm-hmm. As a unhealthy 4, I'm melancholy. I'm brooding. I'm pouting. I hate everybody. Yeah. Just leave me alone. And also on top of that, at your core, you're healthy or unhealthy based on your own characteristics mm-hmm. of your number. So, for example, a 1 is a perfectionist. When I'm at my best, I really do want to make things better. Mm-hmm. I'm attracted to goodness. I'm attracted to making the world a better place. I want to see people and things live up to their potential. Mm-hmm. Life is about doing your best, setting standards, setting goals, and living up to them. Mm-hmm. That's when a 1 is in a good place. When a 1 is in a bad place, that perfectionism takes over.
Right.
And nobody can do anything right. Mm-hmm. My family can't do anything right. I can't do anything right. My coworkers can't do anything right. It's like the bar is set so unreasonably high that nobody can meet it. And mm-hmm. everyone disappoints me, including myself.
Right.
What about 7s? Tell me about the unhealthy, healthy 7.
So the healthy 7, ironically, goes towards a 5. And the 5 is what Mike and I were talking. They tend to be, I think there's less of them in the population, Mike said. But they're like...
They are. There's... I think 6s are the most common in society, they believe. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the percentage is, but I did just see 5s are... at a little bit less than 5% of the population mm-hmm. identify as a 5.
Right. And I'll back up too, for those who don't remember, like the 7s, they are that joyful enthusiast, life. They tend to be adaptable, strong desire to have positive experiences. They're often, good humor, see a big picture, visionaries kind of thing. But they can also be impulsive and have issues like any other number. But a 5 tends to be that more intellectual, observant, independent. They seek knowledge and understanding. And then the 1, as Mike is, which is what's ironic, when I'm unhealthy, I go to a 1.
So when I'm healthy, I become you, and when you're unhealthy, you become me.
Yes, which was really interesting because when Mike told me a lot about being a 1, there's definitely times in my life when that 1 kind of comes in, and I feel like sort of takes over, like I feel more of that one. And so what that can mean is, if you're healthy as a 7, I'm still going to be that 7 and I'm enthusiastic and I'm optimistic, but 7s can be flighty. They can, avoid being in the current moment and processing any of their pain. They're almost, I guess, I would say detached from their body or their basic needs sometimes, And so when a 7's healthy, by leaning more towards that 5, a 7's able to actually be in the moment, be a little more grounded, still have those big ideas, be optimistic, be fun, but not be as impulsive, not be as, so future focused that you can't be in the moment you're in and like ponder what's happening and think deeply. And I can think back to times in my life. I'll talk sometimes about Father Bob, who was like a spiritual mentor to me, but he would always love the questions I asked and the way I pondered things. And I don't know, but I was probably in a more healthy place when I was pondering these deep questions and things. But for me, when I'm unhealthy, when I tend to pour towards the 1, that is when I also become really perfectionistic and can be really hard. And I had some, it was interesting because I even talked about some of this in one of my more recent therapy sessions. And I couldn't, even though I read these things, they don't necessarily feel, I guess, real or what have you, or I'm like, how does this connect? And so sort of one of the insights that I had is like, as a 7, because for us being future oriented and avoiding pain, it doesn't mean you're necessarily excessively shopping or eating or gluttony in the sense of you're an alcoholic or eating all the time. But what we do is we may become very busy and work a lot to distract ourselves. We may, and we may even do it till we like burn ourselves completely out. But 7s also, we always think that the happiness is going to be in the future. And I know we talked a lot about me like liking to travel and stuff, but it's not just that. Like I always think, well, when I lose this 10 pounds that I gained, in the future, that's when things are going to be good and I'm going to be happy, as opposed to thinking I can have that contentment and satisfaction right now. The other thing is, I think, at least in my experience as a 7, people think you can't be in the present moment. I'm really good at being in the present moment when things are going well. Like I can look at my family and be like, I want to cherish this moment forever. Like when everybody's getting along and something beautiful is happening. But when things are bad and painful, that's when I'm not good at being in the present moment. And so those were some of the things we kind of talked about in therapy, is like, I have a tendency to be very, I guess, detached from my body. And what I mean by that is, and this is what 7s do sometimes when they're unhealthy, and this is what it means to be in that headspace, instead of feeling my feelings, and kind of feeling what they're doing in my body, because, sometimes feelings kind of might make your stomach hurt or make your neck tense. Instead of feeling those things, I distract myself, which means I'm not connected to what these feelings are doing. And so what I then do with my feelings is I try to intellectualize my feelings. Like I do this all and I know you've seen me do this, Mike. I'll be like, well, I feel anxious. I don't know why I feel anxious. Why do you think I feel anxious? Or I feel sad. Why would I feel sad? I don't have a reason to feel sad. So instead of just like saying, I feel sad, I'm going to sit with that in this moment and be present, I either immediately go to, well, 10 days from now, when XYZ happens in the future, I won't feel this because the future is going to be better than the right now. Or I start intellectualizing these feelings as if I can somehow logic my way out of it. So that was an insight I had in therapy, because I've spent a lot of time doing cognitive behavioral therapy, which can be good for people, but it's almost a form of intellectualizing. So now in therapy, we're working a lot with me on like, what are you really feeling? And sometimes I'm so detached from my body that I'm like, I can't really tell what I'm feeling, yeah. It's a very strange thing. But that's kind of an example of how, you can go one way or another, but also the critic comes in for me, the perfectionist, because this was the other insight I had in therapy that I had shared with Mike. I become very perfectionistic and I start to either have a lot of regrets. So like, something happened with Josh the other day and I handled it, I think, well, but instead of being like, oh, I did a good job, I started criticizing myself and thinking about how when the same thing happened to Jacob and Maria, I didn't handle it well, so it's like I have all this regret, or like I'll be very self-critical. And so my therapist will ask, well, when this internal critic's talking to you, what are they trying to accomplish, And for me, that perfectionism comes in because if I'm putting so much weight on the future, fixing all my problems, I think the critic starts to think, if you make any mistakes right now, you're going to mess up the future. And the future is where everything's going to be okay. And so that kind of helped me connect. Why would I become a 1? Why would I feel this way? Why would any of this happen? And that, at least for me, inside my head, that's sort of how it all plays out.
Right. And as if that's not enough. The good and the healthy, resourceful, less resourceful of all of these numbers, they have actually gone through, and again, the foundation or when the Enneagram came about is debated, but they think it's been around from hundreds, if not thousands of years. They believe that there is a sort of spirituality that was built in and around the Enneagram, that some of the Enneagram teachings literally come from the Bible, and they believe that there may even be monks that played a big part in shaping and molding, which leads me to say this, with that in mind, they've been able to look at the 9 numbers, and they call it the 7 deadly sins plus 2, that every number has some type of one of the 7 deadly sins with it, and it's what they struggle with. And the 7 deadly sins, you guys, you know them. There's anger, pride, deceit, envy, fear, gluttony, lust, sloth, whatever. That they're there. That when we're unhealthy, we fall into one of those 7 deadly sins. Mm-hmm. This is another reason I knew I was a 1, is I used to tell people I felt like I walked around with a low boil. Mm-hmm. Like I wasn't angry in that I was always lashing out with people, but it didn't take much for me to kind of fly off the handle. Mm-hmm. And maybe not externally, but definitely internally, and it would just, things would infuriate me. And it's like, if you imagine just a pot of water, it gets to that low boil where it's not boiling over, but it's definitely not calm.
You turn the heat up just a little bit and it will.
It can get. And so shocking no one, a number 1's 7 deadly sin is anger. And if you read about it, it says that because 1s have this compulsive need to be perfect in the world, that it makes us very aware when things aren't perfect.
Right.
And we set these unreasonably high expectations and high standards on ourselves and others. And what it literally says is that 1s, that they experience anger in the form of smoldering resentment. And that was never more true. I think, we've been married now almost 27 years. I give you freedom to talk, and be honest. I think that would describe me for a good chunk of our marriage, right?
Well, I wouldn't say a good chunk, but
the
those
early
times,
chunks.
Until you got more, I guess, like introspective and had the life experience to work on yourself and really examine like what was motivating you. Yeah, I do. And I think that's the other thing that's so interesting about this, because had you not done this, you kind of operate on autopilot, you would just kind of keep going through these patterns and never know. But when you do something like this and start to have this insight, you're like, wait a minute, what are they talking about? Anger, And you're like, oh, I am in a low boil,
And for a 7, your deadly sin is gluttony.
Which, interestingly enough,
always I'm eating way too
and
much when I think.
When you said you saw that track, oh, not me. When I saw, and it's even interesting because I think when you initially took the test, you thought maybe I was a 2 as well. But the 7 with gluttony, if you read the description though, it makes more sense because I'm like you. I'm thinking about somebody who's just out there, addicted to things or just too much of everything. But with 7s, it says, to avoid their pain and their painful feelings, they gorge themselves on positive experiences. So it's not necessarily like you're gorging yourself on food. It could be food. That may be the thing but it can be even me, like, I'm going to travel somewhere. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to do something new. But the positive experiences, and then they keep planning and anticipating new adventures because, again, those new adventures in the future, they're going to take away the pain. And entertaining interesting ideas. That's another thing. That's why I think I go on my little rabbit trails of like, today I'm going to know everything there is about UFOs. Tomorrow it's going to be something else. But 7s can, like the gluttony comes in, and even if they do all these things, it's never enough to satisfy them. And they have this frenzied pursuit of these distractions that can escalate to the point that it feels like gluttony. So again, sometimes you got to read a little bit about it because you'll look like, even I look at like 3s, they probably changed this word, but they're saying for 3s, it's deceit. I'm sure they have a new word that sounds a little less like harsh on that. But if you read about it, it's not that 3s are out there deceiving everybody. It's that 3s, that they're going to value how they appear to the outside, the substance of it.
That 3 me were the Killians.
Yeah.
They would walk into a room, read the temperature of the room, and be who that room needed them to be. Which is why most pastors are 3s.
Right. And like 2s, it says theirs is pride. Well, that's because, again, when you read this description, it doesn't sound like pride, but it's they direct their attention towards meeting the needs of others while overshadowing any of their own, because they have a secret belief that they alone know what's best for others and they're indispensable. So that becomes prideful. So it's just interesting because if nothing else, even if you haven't fully identified your number, I think it's just the act of like reading these and really trying to be honest with yourself. And I think that's the thing that's hard too, because like when you read the good things about a 7, I'm like, yay, I'm so happy to be a 7. But when I read how sometimes I keep myself busy to avoid everything and burn myself out, and then I become impulsive and, sometimes not reliable and things like that, that doesn't sound so good, so that's not as fun to like focus on. But you have to, I think, for growth and for that insight to get to the healthier parts of you.
Yeah, I would agree. And so not to leave this episode on a downer, because I feel like we spent a lot of time talking about, the unhealthiness and going to unhealthy other numbers and the 7 deadly sins and things like that. Everybody has these amazing healthy qualities. Mm-hmm. And what you need to do is, once you figure out your number, start figuring out how to become healthy.
Yeah.
When I took my test, the WEPPSS, whatever it is, WEPSS, it was back in like January of 2018. I went back and looked. I'm going to take it again here in a couple of weeks. But I was an unhealthy 1 at that point. I really think if I took it now, I'll be surprised if I'm an unhealthy 1. I feel like I am much healthier than I was then. And so I'm kind of excited to see my improvement. But I've had to work really hard over the last 7 years to get to that point. It wasn't like I just waited 7 years and I took the test again and I was better. There was counseling involved. There was literally exposure therapy, where I would leave things less than perfect and work on not getting upset about it. Exhibiting more grace to myself and grace to others. I mean, that was hard. So it's been like an exercise for 7 years to get me to a healthier place.
Well, the other thing that's interesting, I can't remember the phrase for it, but there's also something with each number. It's like a core thing that you felt like maybe you were lacking or what have you that leads. So like for 7s, part of it is nurturing. And I think the other thing, this doesn't mean too, by the way, every one of us has one of these numbers. So it doesn't mean like your parents did a bad job, because that's the other thing. Part of this, when I read this, I was like, oh no, what did I do wrong with each of my kids that made them become this number? Did I not, if Maria's a 7, did I not nurture her enough? Or if Josh is a 9, did I put too much pressure on him to be a certain way? I think that's also insightful, though, as you read, because then you start to look back and you really start to dig into, like, what are those core things that are motivating me? What's that? All of us have probably spiritually in our soul, because we are not going to have perfection on earth, that longing or whatever, like C.S. Lewis talks about it, like this is kind of like we aren't in heaven. You're not in that perfection. So we all have this hole. And I think that's the other thing that's interesting. It helps you explore, like, what's that hole you're trying to fill? And yours as a 1 is a little different than mine. And like what motivates us is going to be a little different. And the way we process these different emotions and pains a little different. So I just think, again, it helps just with that insight, just helps you kind of see yourself in a different way.
It's like, I think we've said this in every episode. It's not, the Enneagram doesn't show you why, it doesn't show you what you do.
Right.
It tells you why you do what you do. The Enneagram is about motivation. What motivates you to be perfect? What motivates you to be an enthusiast? What motivates you to be a helper? Whatever number you are, what motivates you to be a peacemaker? Because there's some things in life that are nurtured into us by our parents and teachers and coaches and employers. But there's other things that are just nature. It's just how we're born. And I think that's at the core, that's the Enneagram. That's your number. This is how I was born. You may have spent your entire life running from that or battling that, the bad of it, but they're good. Like, there's good in every number. That's how God designed us. And it's bringing out that good so that you're more healthy than unhealthy.
Right. And I think that's the other thing that's so interesting, because you do see that sometimes when you see kids at a young age, you see certain characteristics. And to your point, we know that your home life and life experiences and stuff influence that. But there are certain things, like certain amount of stubbornness or a certain amount of, like, maybe being a little more anxious in your nervous system and how it's wired, and those things influence all of it. So again, as a tool, I don't think anything, completely defines everything about who we are. We're unique individuals, but I think this is just another, I guess you could say, tool in the toolbox, and, that you can use to help you grow and to get some insights into yourself.
Right. And I like what an acquaintance of mine, Phil Anderson, he says, the Enneagram, it's not a parlor game. It's not a way of figuring out, your spouse, your parents, or your kids. It's not about teaching others. And it's definitely not an excuse to justify your bad habits. You can't say, well, I'm a 1. That's just how God made me. It's not about any of those things. It's about understanding yourself and ultimately your relationship with God. It's a tool for awareness, for confession. And you're going to notice, and you're going to start to pay attention that we're in the areas of my life is the negative, less healthy, less resourceful side of this number coming out. And where is the more positive coming out? And you'll probably, like, it's easy for me, like, if I'm laughing and joking and feeling enthusiastic, for me, that is the big light. Let me know I'm in a good place. If I'm spending days or weeks or months feeling dark, then I know my 1 is probably not in a good place, because I'm spending way too much time in the -4 zone.
And see, for me, if I'm going into that regret and that self-criticism and that constant, like, you just aren't doing enough, or you didn't do this right, then again, I know that I am not in a healthy place, and I need to try to start working on figuring out some ways, to move out of that space. But the same thing, if I'm in a place where I'm pondering deep questions, or I'm like really, zeroed in on something and focused and more grounded, then I've still got the joy and the fun and all that of the 7, but I'm in a place too where I can actually be in this moment and experience this moment without thinking everything good's going to be somewhere else out there.
Yeah. And I'll end with this, at least what I have to say with what Phil says. Phil says basically your prayer, if you're a 5, 6, or 7, so if you're in the head triad, needs to be, Lord, help me to let go of my need to be safe and secure. For 2, 3s, and 4s in the heart triad, he says, let me let go of my need to be liked and affirmed. And then for the 8, 9s, and 1s, he says, Lord, help me to let go of my need to be in control. And that's really what it boils down to, is understanding, is it safety and security that is dictating the decisions of your life? Is it being liked, being affirmed? Is it being in control? It's letting go of those things, letting God use the healthy you in your number.
Well, and I think the only other thing I'll add to that too is, it does say, like, don't become that person that goes around and points out everybody like, well, clearly you're this, because oftentimes people too do that in a negative way, like, oh, well, you're a 1 because you drive me crazy with all your criticism, or you're a 3 because of whatever, or you're a 9 because you tend towards, never committing on one side or the other, or whatever. I think it's just like so many other things in life. Like when you think about spiritual gifts and things, like we truly can complement one another, and I think that's what's interesting, even in our marriage, if we were both 7s and vacillating between everything, we might not sometimes be as like grounded. I might, or in the moment as we needed to be. But, if we were both 1s, I mean, not that that doesn't work, but just saying in life, the world would be a really boring place if we were all exactly the same. And there's definitely, just like there's negatives in every number, there's positives in every number. And there's ways that we all can learn from each other and work together and complement each other, which is really cool.
Yeah. And these 4 episodes literally are just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
I mean, it is as high level as we can get. It's the tip of the iceberg. You can go, there's amazing books. Obviously, we're big fans of The Road Back to You, Ian Crone's book. We talked about Richard Rohr. He wrote The Enneagram, A Christian Perspective. There's the Sacred Enneagram book that's out there that's very popular. There's websites that even do studies and kind of, like, this and you're this is how you see each other. This is how you need to relate. So there's a lot out there that is still to be unpacked. So I hope that these last 4 episodes of the Enneagram series have been a springboard, not the end. There's so much.
Well, and one thing I want to explore with my curiosity is, because I do like very late diagnosed, but have ADHD, and a lot of the things in the 7, though, I'm like, what is this distinction? Or are most people that have ADHD 7s? Or I don't know, I don't know, but like the spot ADHD with your impulsiveness and sometimes lack of ability to focus, that's a thing with the 7, like all those things. So who knows?
I wonder how many 1s are ADHD.
Probably. I mean, when you think about it, it
might be tough.
Yeah, but could what? And I don't want to like diagnose people with like what we might, but could ones have more OCD type tendencies? Maybe in 7s. I don't know, but it's an interesting thing. It could definitely be
mistaken for OCD. Yes. I mean, people would say that to me all the time. Like I'm a pastor, and for much of our life, we've planted churches and been in church planting and been in some untraditional church settings. And so I like to set the chairs up and perfectly set them up, measured. I do break out the tape measure and measure. And people would always joke, oh, Mike's OCD about the chairs, and would say I had OCD, but I really don't, as much as in my mind, I have, this is how it should be, and it needs to be.
And for it to be, what was those words like what was the word, the positive word for the one, what you bring?
Reformer and improver.
Yeah, for you to improve the chairs. That's yes. We have a lot of magnets on our refrigerator, like completely covered. And so sometimes people would like to come
from places we go. Yeah, we pick up when we travel.
Yeah, so people would like to move Mike's magnets, or like make one a little crooked or something like that to mess with him. Yeah.
Because again, they thought they were like, well, Mike's OCD. This will drive him crazy.
But it's not that.
But
You're
it's
just
not. It's like, no,
you're just a perfectionist. I mean, again, negative, whatever, however you want to say it. But you're striving for that order and the chaos and, for that vision of what things could be.
Yeah. I mean, like with the chairs, as stupid as this sounds, like for me, it was all about excellence. Like in my mind, I wanted to figure out what is the best seating arrangement to, number one, get the maximum number of people in this room that we can get, but also to give people the space and the comfort so they don't feel like they're right on top. So, I mean, the chairs are all about making the worship setting as inviting and excellent as possible. But people would always pick on me and say I was OCD.
And like for me too, when people, with some of the things like that people might think are flighty or whatever, but sometimes it's like once my mind starts making certain connections, you've experienced this. My poor boss does this too. Like I'll sit down and I'll say one sentence and then the next sentence is like 14 steps that I've gone through in my head. And he's like, wait a minute, I have totally missed the connection. But in my head, I've gone through that so fast because once a 7's enthusiastic and doing their big vision thing and excited, I think that's where that headspace, that thinking and stuff comes in, and you're just going through it. But then people would look at that in a different way depending on what environment you're in.
Right.
So yeah.
All right. Well, if you have any comments, questions, feel free to shoot us a message. We're on all things social media. So you can find us we have a Facebook page. We have a website. We're on all the podcast sites. You can leave comments or questions there, but we respond to everybody. We try to. So if you leave a message or email or whatever, we will respond to you. And
as we do special episodes like this was a 4-part series. We've done a few things on traveling and things. So, if there's something that you think we might know about, like, oh, we want you to do a board game episode or, a magnet collection. I don't know. Yeah, I'm sure no one wants that. But, or deep dive into cryptozoology. Any of these things, we also like ideas on things that our listeners want to hear about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we're here for you.
Oh, that is definitely
we're here
why we're here. Yes, definitely.
All right. Well, everyone have an amazing day, and go figure out your number. Go do some studying, and let us know how your Enneagram life is going.
Yes. Till next time.